Okay, well, thanks everyone. Welcome everyone. I call this a regular meeting of the King County Regional Homelessness Authority Implementation Board to order. We will conduct this meeting via Zoom. All attendees will be muted until the public comment period. Please note that this meeting is being recorded. All visual, verbal, and written comments are public record. Board members who ask questions or share a comment, please raise your hand by clicking the button on the right side of your screen, and you'll be entered into a queue. When discussions formally begin, I will call on you in order in which you're raise your hand. After your turn, you can raise your hand again to be entered back into the queue. Look to staff to take us through roll call.
Okay. Carrie Anderson. Nate Caminos.
Here.
Paula Carvalho.
Here.
John Chelmnack.
Here.
Gordon McHenry Jr. Harold Odom.
Here.
Damian Patnad.
Here.
Adrian Quinn. Michael Ramos.
Here.
Sarah Rankin.
Here.
Simha Reddy. And Juanita Spotted Elk.
Lamont Green here on behalf of Juanita Spotted Elk as an alternate.
All right, thank you.
All right, we have quorum. Thank you, Maria, for walking us through that. We'll begin today's by acknowledging that all U.S. land is originally Native American land. Here in the Pacific Northwest, the Coastal Salish are the original residents and protectors of this land. The Coastal Salish in our region includes the following tribes: Duwamish, Wacoshute, Snoqualmie, Squamish. Native Americans have been present in our region for thousands of years and remain present to this day. The Coastal Salish, who have been stewarded these beautiful lands and waters since time immemorial, we must commit to do the same for the planet and for generations to come. I also wanted to acknowledge that it is usually this time of the year that many tribes along our Salish Sea take part in the tribal canoe journey, where more than 100 canoes begin their journey in different parts of Vancouver Island and British Columbia and paddle down over a matter of 2 or more weeks as they make scheduled individual stops along the Washington and Oregon coast, with each visit hosted by region's tribes. This tradition dates back to 1989 with the original paddle to Seattle. I know last year's event was unfortunately canceled due to the pandemic, and this year there are small gatherings and virtual events this summer. If you're not familiar with the canoe journeys and are interested in learning more, I'm including a link to a feature story by the Seattle Times did in the summer of 2019, marking the 30th anniversary of the canoe journey. It touches on the history of forced removal, forced assimilation, and genocide, and how this annual tradition is just one of many ways the Coastal Salish people are restoring their cultural heritage and reviving their maritime traditions. Before we continue, my co-chair Harold Odom has something he'd like to share, in addition to a short video he'd like us to watch as well. Harold?
Thank you, Nate. I really have nothing to say except this video explains itself. Except that BIPOC does include Hispanic, Latinx, anyone of color. Trauma has been informed and trauma has been recognized. This video explains it all. Yeah.
I begin to get quiet first, and so I begin to get silenced, and I stop talking. I begin to withdraw, and that's not me at all.
Over the last few months, Darnisha Weary of Edmonds started noticing a shift in her personality. Even as she seemed busy and driven, protesting for racial justice, opening up a new business, a coffee shop, she realized she was living a muted version of herself. She was suffering from racism.
I was experiencing some serious racism, overt racism in the workplace. I received some pretty nasty emails with monkeys in them. I was called some pretty nasty names.
Weary worked at a white nonprofit where racist emails intensified. It was too much to bear.
I ended up having a cardiac episode and had to be rushed to the hospital. That they thought I was having a heart attack. I went through all these tests, right? And then it came down to it was stress related. It was stress caused. It was caused by stress. And I didn't realize that this pandemic and this racial uprising was affecting me in such a way.
What Darnisha Weary is talking about is racial trauma. It's even got a scientific name, race-based traumatic stress, RBTS. According to Mental Health America, it's a mental and emotional injury caused by encounters with racial bias, ethnic discrimination, racism, and hate crimes.
It's unique in the fact that with racial trauma, it's constantly happening, it's ongoing, whereas with PTSD, typically it's a singular event.
Ashley McGirt is a mental health therapist who specializes in racial trauma, a concept scientists have studied for more than 20 years, but is now gaining more attention.
We know that it exists by the way that Black and brown bodies respond. Currently, Black and brown bodies are experiencing chronic stress-related illnesses at disproportionate rates. We are dying at disproportionate rates, and we can attribute that a lot to racism because, you know, we have more strokes, high blood pressure, chronic heart failure, a lot of these things that are attributed to stress.
Experts say RBTS can be traced down through generations. Darnisha Weary has seen that herself.
I think as Black women, I grew up watching my mom and my grandmother and all the women in my family work so hard and never say no. You know, like, I need this. I saw them put others before themselves all the time.
If you think back to when Black people were enslaved, Black women were taking care of the slave master's children, breastfeeding them. They were doing all sorts of things to take care of the whole community. Can you imagine how significant of an amount of stress that can be?
Psychologist Dr. Katrina Sanford of Seattle says one of the keys to coping with racial trauma is understanding your ancestral connection.
If you don't know where your people come from, and that's one of the things that's a part of health, is being able to know yourself. And when you know yourself and you know you're the bomb and you know you're amazing, regardless of what society tells you, then that helps your health outcomes improve. It helps you physically be more healthy, it helps you mentally be more healthy, and it helps you spiritually be more healthy.
Dr. Sanford founded the healing center Niles Edge to do just that, a spiritual, now virtual space to help people connect to themselves, using therapies such as breathing exercises, sound and talk therapy, and meditation.
Niles Edge is trying to ensure that our people can now understand who they are, how their ancestors healed, and figure out ways to heal themselves so that we can continue to live in this society that oppresses us, but so that not just live in it, thrive and find joy in who we are, even though things are really difficult.
Remember how Darnisha opened up a new business? It wasn't just a financial venture, but part of a healing process that included therapy and a cup of black coffee.
We kept looking for a space and a place to just be with our Black community in an area where there's it's pretty much white all around, and we could never find a place.
Since Darnisha and her husband couldn't find it, they created it.
Being a Black person here, in Black coffee, I'm allowed to be unapologetically Black. I don't have to code switch. I don't have to worry about if I'm too loud. I speak with my hands. I don't have to worry about controlling that or controlling my facial figures. And these are things that I know that I have done throughout my life, in the workplace, in my community, just to be safe, because I live in an all-white space.
So how can we as a society find solutions for people suffering from racial trauma? Mental health experts say it begins with acknowledging this trauma exists and then finding empathy.
I want our businesses to understand that if someone needs a mental health break, that's okay. That the environment, not just in businesses, but in our society as a whole, allows for people to take that time that they need. Because you can't have someone at your job be able to do their job well and be productive if they're unhealthy, if they're unhappy, and if their mental health is struggling. And so that's where I hope we go, where we become more empathic about the physical and mental things that people are going through and allow them the space to heal and support them as they're doing it.
Sounds like a challenge to the companies to actually pay attention to mental health.
Absolutely.
Back to Darnisha's coffee shop, the safe space she's created. She hopes all people of color realize it's normal to struggle. But in order to heal, you've got to focus on caring for yourself.
The joy that I can't even explain. I've learned I have balance in my life right now, and things are not always perfect, but I know how to say no. I learned how to set boundaries. I take care of myself. I put it in my calendar to turn things off or to take a walk or to do something for myself. And so it's just so important for Black women because we're carrying so much every single day. We're carrying so many things we don't even realize we're carrying.
Everything in life is a negotiation.
Thank you, Nate. I just want to put out to everyone on the board, I encourage anyone to send in something from their culture, their experience, land acknowledgement. Let's educate each other. So thank you for your time and your patience.
Thank you, Harold, for sharing that with all of us. I know we have Adrian Quinn, who's in the attendee room, whose staff is helping pull into the participant room, but just wanted to acknowledge her for the record as well. Thank you for being here, Adrian. Instructions for public comment. All right, so we will have 10 minutes for public comment starting here in a few minutes. If you would like to provide verbal comment, please type your name and the city from which you're calling or tuning into the chat, which is now open and will remain open until the public comment section of the agenda closes. In addition, you may use the chat box to provide written comment from now until public comment section of the agenda concludes. Let's move on to consent agenda. On our consent agenda, we are seeking board approval for the draft minutes from the June 9th regular meeting. Is there a motion to approve the June 9th meeting minutes?
So motion to approve the June 9th meeting minutes. This is Adrian.
Seconded.
Thank you. We got a motion from Adrian and a second from Sarah. Thank you both. Any discussion? Nope. All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Abstain. All right, the minutes are approved. Let's get into public comment. We now have 10 minutes for public comment. Again, if you wish to comment and have not yet typed your name and city in the chat box, please do so now. Each individual will be given 2 minutes to comment and will be unmuted and called on in the order that their names were entered into the chat. When you reach the end of 2 minutes, we will ask you to finish your comment so that others may speak as well. I will close public comment, seeing that it is 2:19 now at 2:29. Public comment is now open. Staff, do we have anyone signed up to be our first public speaker?
Yes, it looks like Elizabeth M. Let me allow them to talk.
Okay, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you, Elizabeth. Please go.
Okay, I'm Elizabeth Maupin from Issaquah, and I have had connection with people who were homeless. I have been homeless myself, and it comes to my attention that some of the people who are moving from homelessness into housing are still not receiving the support that they need. Trauma-informed care is apparently not the standard here on the East Side. One of the things that I've noticed is that people's vehicles are frequently towed with little or no notice. at some of the affordable housing that we have here. It seems that certain tenants get more targeted than others, and these are often people of color. So I'm hoping that as the Regional Homelessness Authority deals with not only getting people into housing, it also looks at what kind of support people get once they're in housing. If you lived in your vehicle and it was towed, you are really screwed. If you are no longer living in the vehicle, but still dependent on it for transportation to work, for picking up things larger than you can carry from the bus stop home, it's still a big issue. And people with low income don't have a lot of money to get their cars out of the pound. So I really would hope that they would look more closely at how we are helping people once they're in housing. And if there's anything that I or the Faith Coalition out here can do to help, please let us know. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Maria, are there other speakers?
I do not see anyone currently.
Okay. I'll give it a moment there. Okay. For anyone who did not have an opportunity to provide public comment and would like to still, we'll leave the chat window open for the next 10 minutes. Should there be any other information you'd like to share for the record, but thank you again, Elizabeth, for your participation. Let's move on to the CEO's report. So we will now hear from CEO Mark Dones with an update on the emergency housing vouchers, the regional authorities' new hires, and sub-regional planning. Mark, hand it over to you.
Thanks, everybody. And good to see you all. I appreciate you being here on a beautiful day. So I will be leaning on Peter a little bit for some of this. I wanted to provide just a brief status update with regard to the emergency housing vouchers, which, as many of you know, were released by HUD with a mandate that housing authorities who will administer the vouchers enter into MOUs with the COC about prioritization within the administration of those vouchers. Myself and truly largely Peter, I want to, it's important to make sure that people have their shine. Really, Peter Lynn here. have driven the process of executing on those MOUs with the housing authorities over a really, I cannot stress this enough, an extremely aggressive timeline. Inside that, what Peter and I have driven towards, and this is the last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it to Peter for any additional detail. What we've driven towards is a prioritization framework that we feel lifts up our values, that's what I'm looking for, around racial equity and justice, and prioritizing, I can't talk today, that's real bad for a public board meeting, huh? Prioritizing folks who are in the deepest need. And so what we really drove towards was a set of criteria that looked at folks who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, including vehicular homelessness. I want to be really clear about that as a priority. And then also looking at how we ensure the expansion of the utilization of our COVID prioritization work, which allowed us to move resources towards historically marginalized populations who were designated as being at higher risk of COVID. And that was allowable underneath the notice that HUD provided, and so we included that. So in all of the documentation that we've worked out with the housing authorities, we have explicit language that highlights the need to drive resources towards folks of color, towards LGBTQ folks, particularly trans folks, and we're excited that possibility exists. And I'm going to turn it over to Peter, and if there's anything you want to add for this brief update on the EHVs.
Thanks, Mark. We got a variety of feedback from a number of different stakeholders. I really appreciated the feedback from the Lived Experience Coalition, which zeroed in on the use for permanent supportive housing move-on programs. So we've reached out to supportive housing providers and looked at that population because it was also a good fit. It's within the framework of use and would permit those high impact units of supportive services to be matched then with people who have deep needs and are currently unsheltered. So there's another possibility. The one thing about these vouchers is that they do not themselves carry supportive services. So matching with other resources that have those services is one of the interesting challenges and with fitting this resource. A good partnership with the PHAs, and there are 3 of them. They're the King County, Seattle, and Renton Housing Authority. Each received an allocation. The total is about 1,300 vouchers overall.
Thanks, Peter. I'll pause. Any questions from board members on EHV before we move to our next item in this portion? All right, hearing none. The next update is just to let you all know that we have continued to hire people, which I'm always super excited to talk about. As you know, as I believe you know, we offered a role to a chief administrative officer. That person has accepted. Her name is Meg Barclay. She will also be joining us from LA and has her most recent experiences as the homelessness coordinator for the city of Los Angeles, which is a job that if it sounds vague, it's because it turned into kind of a lot of stuff. It's my understanding looking at Meg's resume. A lot of it really was the driving of the administration of the various activities that the city stood up over the last several years, having direct responsibility for a lot of asset management and ensuring that essentially supply chains that had to span the city of LA were intact every day. And so we're excited to have Meg in that role. We believe that she'll add quite a bit of technical capacity to our team in those key areas. She will be overseeing IT, finance, and human resources directly, and play a leadership role in assisting in the development of our annual budget. And so in that regard, you will be talking with Meg quite a bit, and look forward to welcoming her to the team again on the 8th. I have also hired a special assistant who is on this call, Naomi C., who can introduce herself if she'd like. Naomi's most recent experience comes from working at Lehigh, where she has provided quite a bit of support there to that team. We're really excited to have Naomi join. I will also say that I met Naomi through Adrian Quinn. So very grateful to our board members for making sure that we are connecting with talented folks. Naomi's skill set is quite broad, and so the role of special assistant to me, which is really about driving a whole lot of special projects and briefing materials and reports and liaising with the community, we feel very confident that Naomi will be able to fulfill that role with a standard of excellence. Naomi, is there anything that you'd like to say about yourself and introduce yourself to the board?
Thank you, Mark. And I'll just take a moment to say that I consider it such a privilege to be with such brilliant hearts and minds, and really excited to meeting you all in the coming weeks.
Thanks, Naomi.
Welcome, Naomi.
Finally, and perhaps most exciting, we have hired a deputy CEO. You may have seen in your materials that on that role for the staffing plan, there is a place for a name, and it says in big letters, embargoed. I was really hoping to have that embargo lifted in time for our conversation today. Unfortunately, that was not able to happen. And due to this person's current role, we really need to respect that embargo. I think you will all be very excited when we are able to release that information, which I hope is in the coming days. If any of you would like a peek behind the curtain, of course, you're more than welcome to reach out to me directly, and I'm more than happy to provide you with that information. I cannot stress enough, and I really wish I was able to just say it publicly, but I cannot stress enough that this person brings decades of experience in administration, in government, in community work, in grants and finance, and public relations. Has a law degree. I keep hiring a lot of lawyers, I think. I don't know, maybe I just sort of sense that something is going to happen. No, I think that they will also be able to help us have strategic guidance around how we interact with some of our trickier legal frameworks as a special jurisdiction. At every organization that they have previously had a leadership role in, they have been truly beloved by their staff. And so because of the particular role of deputy CEO and chief of staff, and having a really strong inward orientation, was really delighted to see that in the sort of references and as folks talked about this person. So excited about that. I will note that means that as of today, every chief role, which includes, of course, the deputy CEO, is filled, with the sole exception of the ombuds role, which we will fill in collaboration with the LEC. That was the commitment that we made way at the outset of that, and we will not budge from. The LEC has already developed a job description and sort of a reporting matrix and accountability matrix for that person. And so now we are preparing to move into the next step of a LEC-driven recruitment and confirmation, or selection and confirmation process. And so looking forward to having that role filled, as it provides, of course, a vital accountability function for our entire agency. And we will be grateful to them for joining our team when they do. Any questions on staffing?
I have a question, Mark. In terms of, are you talking about any of the staffing or just the staffing positions that we've discussed so far?
Just the ones for that we've discussed right now. When we get to the
Okay.
staffing plan, I am sure we'll have a more
right.
conversation about all of
I
this.
can wait. Thank you.
Mark, this is Harold. So, and this is done with, you and I would get along, it's just great. So you understand where I'm coming from. So I do remember Naomi, and we worked together. It was really high on the self-log, and I'm sorry Bill Hack is not here to remind me more of, but of the on Ellis, and you had developed a plan. What I'm curious about, and this goes to the staffing plan, Mark, I see people that are not centered, or you're centered, or I'm centered, and I'd like to hear, is there a robust plan to get them there? Or is this going to be, we hope we get them there, but is there going to be a deliberate way of getting them there?
I think if I'm understanding the question appropriately, I think what you're asking me is about what will become our staff development plans, right? And what they will include and that. And I think that following conversation with the LEC about a candidate, right, who is there for confirmation, the feedback that I received that I am quite clear on, right, is that folks need to see clear internal, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge that board member Reddy has also joined us. that folks need to see like a clarity, right? That like there are, that folks are being evaluated on their ability to implement and understand race and social justice, that folks are being routinely educated, right? So that like you're not just being set up, but that you're actually being provided with lots of tools, and that there are the appropriate supports necessary for folks who are either early in their careers or simply have not done that kind of work before, to engage in upskilling there. I will say that I'm, you know, with respect to the staff that we have hired and the roles that they have, I'm confident that they can execute on those roles in a relationship to the vision and principles of the authority. I also think that again, I heard that feedback, and so we will be implementing an internal approach, right, to that upskilling. I will be candid that at present, we need to get a little bit more bandwidth to build that out. So I think for us, that is, and I want to be clear when I say that I'm not talking about like next year, I'm talking about next quarter, right? So you can ask me about this in September, and there will be an answer about like, here's what we've got and here's where we're headed. And of course, obviously happy to brief you along the way and include you in the development of those materials if you'd like to be.
You know I would, but thank you for that, Mark. Thank you. And
No
I like
problem.
the staircase behind you.
I see that Board Member Ramos has his hand raised.
Thank you. And this may be related to the governance and internal controls conversation later on. But since a matter was brought up related to hiring and process, a question emerged for me is what HR policies exist and under who those HR policies exist if this agency is independent of King County. So there's maybe an interim place right now while you're developing policies, but I just don't know under, you know, who's developing HR policies, under whose policies exist, to which some of these questions may refer to later on, and that would answer the question. So you can answer this later on in the conversation, but it occurred to me under the governance and internal controls, I said, under what policies are you functioning? And I'm comfortable with whatever answer you develop.
Thank you. No, it's a pretty good question. So at present, we are operating under essentially a draft employee handbook, which actually was completed during my tenure at NIS. Like we completed an entire draft handbook. That handbook is now with Francis and Co. actually, who are, to my understanding, and Peter has been managing that directly, so may have something to say here, but to my understanding, they are in the process of providing edits and edits specifically with regard to compliance and Washington and regional, county code and where applicable city code, right? And that once that is complete, that will become the governing HR document. Peter, is there anything you got there?
Yeah, thank you.
That's right. So we're working through a set of policies as rapidly as possible, and this will follow very shortly.
Thanks. I see Lamont.
Yes, thank you. Since we're talking about staffing and HR policy, I was wondering whether the King County Regional Homeless Authority would have a compensation philosophy that would really establish pay equity between the highest paid employee and the lowest paid employee. I think sometimes when we have tight budgets and so forth, we often sometimes skim on the frontline staff. And so I think it's really important to have some compensation philosophy to ensure pay equity between the highest paid and the lowest paid. And then my second piece, and sorry about the background noise, I'm in a hotel lobby. But my second piece is really, we have some amazing homelessness service providers and amazing frontline staff. And we often hear from people with lived experience when we're doing outreach about they connect with a case manager or a housing navigation, and then that person leaves. Mm-hmm. And so with high turnover, in a very tight labor market, it is so difficult to maintain staff at with a lot of our providers. And so there needs to be some type of compensation philosophy in really addressing this issue so that our frontline staff at these agencies are paid truly a living wage for the amazing hard work that they do. So I guess the compensation philosophy is twofold. One, internal with King County Regional Homeless Authority that established a written pay equity philosophy to ensure equity between the highest paid and the lowest paid. And then the second is to make sure that we're addressing the low pay and high turnover of our frontline staff.
Yeah, both deeply appreciated. The answer to your first question is, I mean, straightforwardly, no, we don't have a written policy at this point, but we should have one. I will tell you that in budget development, we indexed all salaries against AMI. And so we don't have anything that is far, I mean, like truly everything is within our lowest available salary, right? Like is, I believe, 10 off AMI. And that, I mean, that was a conversation that we had in budget development that was like, from a perspective of like, you know, I think to your point, Lamont, like oftentimes we say like, well, we just need more bodies, let's keep pushing it down, right? And so we take an 80 and turn it into 40, right? And our team internally said that was not, we couldn't do that. And so we haven't. But I do agree with you that we need to write it down. And so we will absolutely do that and bring that to the board for consideration with our next run of operational policies. And thank you for bringing that to the attention that we need to write it down. On the external point, we've heard, I mean, like, you know, over the years, I think you and I in many rooms have heard that same concern. I will say that concern is even more elevated right now. And Peter and Alexis and I, in our conversations with providers across the region, have heard repeatedly that right now staff attrition is pretty brutal, and that the pipelines are not there, right? So that even when people have the budget available to pay new staff, right, people just aren't applying. And so we are beginning to have conversations with folks about a number of different things that we think the authority might be able to support, including like sort of workforce and pipeline development, but then also what I'm sort of referring to as true cost evaluation for the purpose of appropriations conversations. And so what I've asked the providers to begin to prepare as we talk to them is, what does this actually cost? Like, what does this cost to actually do? And what would it cost if you were paying people what they deserve for the complexity of their work and at a rate that is going to dampen attrition, right? Because certainly as we go into budget conversations post FY22, right? So for FY23, 24, 25, like and beyond, right? We want to be migrating towards true cost, both in terms of and again, I will be candid with you all as I believe my job is to be, right? Our system runs predominantly on the backs of people of color and predominantly women of color, right? And so the concern that people are not being paid is not just a like, well, it would be nice if people made more money. It is a racial justice issue, and it is therefore, for me personally, and I think for this organization legislatively, a core issue. And so in our, what we are going to look to do is to produce that kind of true cost analysis. And then every year, what you will hear me ask you for approval to do is to go ask everybody else for the money to get there. And so on that point, I think our thinking is well aligned. Again, from a true project plan and like when will it be done and when will we be able to report it out to you, I need a little bit more bandwidth in order to get there. But it is, again, I want to be really clear. We're already having those conversations with providers in anticipation of wrapping a full project plan around it and executing on it as a body of work. And I see Sarah Rankin.
Hi, Mark.
This
Thank
is
you.
Adrian.
Oh.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I apologize.
After Sharon, I have a follow-up question. I apologize. I'm on the phone. Sorry.
Of course.
Thank you. I wanted to say thanks to everybody who's spoken so far. It's sort of formulated some questions in my mind. I was thinking about how Michael was asking about what specific policies are governing. I appreciated Harold raising the question about equity and the discussion with Lamont about perhaps putting some things in writing, revisiting the question of equity and how that is manifest in the staff, because I know there's a position that's directly related to equity, but I'm hoping you can just say maybe a little bit more about whether there are specific policies that are put into place in the hiring process and in the training process throughout the retention of folks, because we know that equity is such a fundamental piece of all of this work. Is there a specific written policy, or if there isn't, could you explain just in a little more detail, as opposed to training that might happen later? How is that question or the analysis, equity analysis, govern or drive the staffing model that you're using? Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, everyone. So I want to be really, really clear here, right, in terms of like what we can consider when we hire a person, and we cannot consider their race or gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation. These are not things we can consider in hiring. And I know you know that as an attorney. I'm being clear for the public. So what we do when we are in a hiring process with a person is we ask a lot of questions about their experience with equity implementation, with thinking through equity frameworks, with being able to integrate. I am, of course, I'm particularly interested in people's experience of integrating equity and social justice into government work, right? Which is very different than doing it in private sector environments, or frankly, even nonprofit environments. And so everyone who has been hired has been through multiple rounds, actually, of that kind of conversation. And I think that the long term is, I think of long term right now as September. That's where I am. So the September goal is to have all of our work subordinated to the equity-based decision-making framework, right? And so that's part of the reason why the procurement policy is back with you, is because there was a voice amendment to ensure that it was subordinated to the equity-based decision-making framework, and then it didn't make it into the final voice vote. So we got to bring it back to make sure that it is, right? And so that I think will become our written governing document that then flows through all of the things that we do. Again, for me, long-term, for everyone else, I think a month away or a month and a half away now, right? Like as we build out the rest of the agency. I think that the other thing that I want to be really clear about is, in my analysis as a hiring manager, I am most interested not in people's sort of immediate and sort of profound expertise on race, equity, or social justice. I am mostly interested in, are they capable of doing an honest assessment of themselves, where they are, what they do or do not know? Because in my experience, no one knows it all. It is a lifelong journey. And what I need people to show up as, right, is already in that space. More than anything, that is the most important thing to me as a hiring manager and as a leader, right? Because ultimately that journey of learning is something that we're all going to have to walk together. And we all need to be able to understand what we do or do not know inside the relationship of a team. And I think, I'm hopeful anyway, that comes across, like me not knowing everything, right? comes across in my interactions with folks broadly, but certainly with the LEC, who, if I'm again speaking in candor, and I'm not trying to speak out of school, so someone kick me under the table if I am, but virtual table. But recently had some feedback about like, this doesn't look right to us, right? Like on a process actually that Alexis is in charge of, and my response was like, okay, we'll change it, right? Like, because I do legitimately believe, right, that like that's how we migrate every day towards a more just iteration, right, of what we do together, is by starting from a place of not knowing everything, and being open to feedback from people who are in the position to know.
I think Adrian was going to be going next, but I'd like to have Adrian.
Thanks, Harold. Mark, you and your team have done great work so far, and I wanted to, since the ombudsperson position is not yet filled, and I know early on we saw salary ranges that really made a clear value statement that the ombudsperson was one of the most important people within the organization. And I just wanted to ask if you could comment on that and just, make sure that as people are continued to be hired, that position really shows the value that we all put on that position to ensure that that salary is higher potentially than many of the others, since people with lived experience, and that feedback is central to the work that's being done.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. Yes, so in our development of our full staffing plan and the budget allocations that I've done thus far, I have not touched that salary band, right? Like the ombuds role is a chief role, and so is going to be compensated as such. And we have also allocated 2 staff to that team at the specialist band right now. And we will, I'm getting a little anxious about time, I'll be honest. I'm going to just be very candid. Like, we got a lot to do on the.
I was going to jump in,
Yeah.
Mark, real quick too, because obviously this is a lot of great, robust conversation amongst our board with you in regards to staffing. I just wanted to share with the board. I hope that while we're running later and while Harold and I are mindful of everyone's time, and we do have the capacity to go up to 2 hours, we did end up setting the agenda for 9 minutes. I hope folks are able to stay longer than maybe originally anticipated, because even the sub-regional planning update that we have with Mark, Alexis, and other members of the staff team, as well as the staffing plan presentation that we are open to hear for today, that's teed up for tomorrow's governing committee's consideration, meetings consideration as well, that we do continue to have, that we're not rushing through these other 2 processes for the time that we have this afternoon. So with that, please continue, Mark.
Thank you. In my mind, I was just saying, like, maybe this is a conversation for the staffing plan, but I will say, right, that like we have budgeted 2 FTEs there, and as you will hear from me when we get to the staffing plan, that's not enough, and our internal concern right now is really bucketed in 3 areas where we don't have the necessary budget to staff as robustly as we think we should be. And we'll walk you through that and walk you through the choice logics there. I do truly believe that the design that we have is the best design to lay the track towards where we want to go. But I am making no claims to a perfect org design or all the right capacity in all the right places. I am putting in front of you the organization that we can pay for and that we must staff by January in order to take over $135 million of disbursement and supporting people across the region. So I've answered, I believe I've answered Adrian's question. And then I tacked on something else there as well. Is there anything else, or could we potentially move forward?
Co-Chair Odom, are you good? Did you have something you wanted to add or ask real quick, or do you think that might be able to hold for the staffing plan conversation, Co-Chair Odom?
I want to know what AMI stands for. I'm just stupid, okay?
You're not stupid, Harold. It's area median income. So it's And I apologize. I shouldn't speak in acronyms in a public meeting. So I'm going to take that actually as a gracious reminder that I should be more accessible in my language. So AMI stands for Area Median Income, which is the index, right, of like, this is the average income that people in a given zip code or jurisdiction make. It is the metric that we use to evaluate whether or not a salary is going to be able to pay to keep a person housed and fed, right, while also leaving them leeway to live a life. There's a lot of discussion that we can have offline in a coffee shop or something about like whether or not that's the right metric, but it's what we have at our available at this point in time. If there's nothing else on that, I think what I would ask folks is, are you comfortable getting like a 45-second overview of the like there were slides which are in your packet, but for the purposes of this meeting, are you comfortable getting a 45-second overview of the sub-regional planning work that's taken place thus far?
I have to ask that you give the presentation that you were planning to give. I've invested too many years of work in subregions to bypass this. If everyone else wants to go ahead, fine, but I think this is part of our job. But
other folks? Someone has to say a direction they'd like to go, please.
Mark, how long would the presentation be with the slides and such?
Alexis?
I can make it 5 minutes if I was speeding through in order to make it through all the points.
Okay. I agree with Michael that I think it's important for us to discuss. I think if there are some things in your judgment that you think were just sort of frosting, that might be different, but I agree with Michael that I think that it's important for us to have a proper briefing.
Pastor Anderson weighing in, I'd agree with Michael as well.
I absolutely believe the work is substantive, so I'm comfortable. I need to be very clear with you all as my board right now. I must have a vote on the staffing plan today because we have to go to the governing committee tomorrow. And that was not my decision, that was calendars. So like, I just want to be we can't lose quorum before we have a full staffing plan vote.
Would it be too disruptive to switch those? Like do this, talk about staffing, do the vote, so to make sure that gets done. But whatever you guys think is best.
Michael, does that work for you? Does that work for people? But I do agree the work is good and substantive, and I would like you all to know about it.
Yeah. I mean, it works for my time, but you know, I'm subject to the group.
Would that work for the rest of the board? Can I just get thumbs up? Thank you.
Mark, let me be clear. This is Pastor Anderson again. You're out calling for us to go on with approve the staffing plan that you've just shared with us. Is that correct?
Yeah, so, well, I'm not asking you to approve it yet. I got to talk about it first, but right now, I think the question on the table is, can we flip the order in the agenda and talk about the staffing plan now and then talk about sub-regional planning so that we are ensured of getting that vote?
Okay.
With quorum, because we can keep meeting and talking about the sub-regional planning without quorum, but we can't take a vote. And I just want to be conscious of as Chair Camino said, right? Like if people have to drop off and we lose quorum, then the vote won't count. It's got to count.
I'm good, Mark. I might have some questions related to sub-regional planning on the staffing plan, but we'll keep it to that just to allow for the opportunity for a vote, since we had advertised for 3:30 and folks might need to drop off. So I'm good with that.
Sounds good. So I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see? And look at that, it's the sub-regional staffing plan. So can everyone see that? Yes, okay, great, sorry. I briefly lost you, so I couldn't see your responses. Okay, so we're gonna walk through the staffing plan. It's largely straightforward. I want to give a couple, again, top line notes. One, we don't have the money that we would love to have to staff some functions more robustly, and we're super clear on that. And so feedback in those spaces is appreciated, but the real changes that we can make are pretty thin. And we've worked real hard to make this go as far as it can. Just so you're all clear, our current admin budget to staff is about 4.3% of our total budget, which is significantly less than most admin budgets attached to programs that typically operate somewhere in the 7 to 10 range. And I believe that admin percentage is significantly less than the city of Seattle, and I believe it's also less than King County, which is not, I'm not knocking anybody here, right? I just want to be really clear about like what we're working with when we're building out the plan. I think the other thing that I would offer is that in our staffing, what we were primarily concerned about was being able to get the organization to perform in line with the standards of equity and justice, right? And so trying to figure out how to make that a thing that was across the organization and not just held by a position sort of on the senior team, but found in other places as well, in addition to the equity-based decision-making framework, right? And then also just just to be very straightforward, the amount of work in front of us is very, very substantive. Starting January 1, we will be administering roughly 200 contracts across the region with disbursement responsibility for about $135 million. And it's got to go out on time because it pays people's rent. So these were the things that were our primary concerns in this space. We also solicited feedback from key folks. So we got provider feedback, we got some suburban city feedback, and we also spoke with SCA leadership directly. As a result of a conversation with SCA leadership yesterday, I have made a slight edit to this plan, which is slightly different from your packet, which I will highlight when I get to it. It does not, I want to be clear, shift the balance of FTEs. It just changes the position of one and reassigns another from one unit. But again, we'll get there. So I'm going to walk through the four main teams, and then sort of what I think of as my team, which is the team that comes off of the deputy CEO. So the first team, which Peter will lead, is program delivery and performance. That is our shop that is responsible for those 200 plus contracts and $135 million. So that's broken into three teams: grants management, system performance, and regional capacity. Grants management is a pretty straightforward shop with regard to focusing on procurement, administering RFPs, responding to RFPs, making sure that ship runs. In that space, you see a grants manager, a procurement coordinator, 2 accounts payable specialists, and a compliance specialist. In the system performance team, this is the team that we imagine as having the most robust interaction with the community and working with providers. So what we heard during the design work for the authority when I was with NIS, and what we frankly continue to hear as we engage with providers across the region, is a desire for collaborative problem solving around like all the things that happen, right? And not just on the spot problem solving, but also collaborative program design, implementation, support, all of that work, right? I think we really imagine, and providers would like to be very shoulder to shoulder, so to speak, and less about contract administration, right? This is one of the significant shifts that we've made in that, again, the grants team is the contracting team, and then the system performance team is the program team. And so they are the folks who will be working with providers, working with folks with lived experience, working with community members to design programs, to implement programs, and then to reassess, reevaluate. So, if something isn't working and a contract amendment is necessary, a program coordinator won't execute that contract amendment. They will pass the request to a grants management team member who will execute it. The goal there, I also want to be clear, is to reduce the lag time between when a provider asks for a contract amendment and when we're able to execute it. That has significantly been raised as an issue. And so we want to make sure that there's a sort of dedicated function that is able to execute on that quickly. I see you, Paula. Is it okay if I finish the last team and then come to you? Okay. So the regional capacity team, it's a mistake. Okay, got it. So the regional capacity team, what we've heard from folks as we connect with providers around the region is that there is a lot of really great work that happens at our regional coalitions, right? Inclusive of, so I also need to be very clear, because I think when people hear us say regional, they think we mean outside of Seattle. For us, Seattle Metro is a subregion. So like, if I say regional, I really do mean everybody. If I'm going to talk about a subregion or two subregions, I will name them. I realized that like I needed to make that clear. So what we've heard from folks across the region is that there are great coalitions. They do really important work, but oftentimes their connection to the system isn't clear, and that they're not necessarily able sometimes to action the things that they talk about because they don't have the capacity. The other thing that we heard was a pretty strong desire for the authority to play a role in standardizing some sort of basic trainings, and not just the typical ones that you've heard about or that we've all talked about trauma-informed care and that kind of work, but also case management, advocacy work, maybe billing, right? Like that there were things that agencies felt like, to the point that Lamont raised earlier, right? That there are things that they invest in really heavily as part of their ongoing cycle of attrition, and that they were starting to be like, well, is this the best use of our dollars, right? Like when these dollars could be better resourced or going directly to people, right? In terms of staff time, when we spend a lot of time training folks on the basics, and perhaps the authority could hold the basics and then we do specialization, right? So like you might get trained on case management 101 by the authority, and then you go to the agency, right, that you work at, and that's where you get your nuanced training on how to work with young people or how to work with survivors, right? But that the authority holds a sort of core curriculum that we help to administer regionally. As I mentioned, we did a lot of thinking about how to ensure that equity was a thing, and my initial goal was to have distributed throughout the organization equity and justice positions at the specialist and coordinator salary band that allowed for every team, right, to have a person who was their point on equity justice initiatives, right? We can't afford that. So what I've done instead, as you can see in the parentheticals, is I've denoted where we will sort of add an equity sort of add-on to a person's job and then increase their base pay by a stipended amount to compensate them for that extra work. But they will then hold the function of being the person who is doing the checking on the EGI stuff for that unit. You will see as we move to post, right, that we need to have some additional conversation, I believe, with community impact and administration to identify where the EJI leads should be there, but they will be there as well. So that is our program delivery and performance team. Again, two teams really structured on being out, engaging with people, building and doing things in a really collaborative way. And I think that was the most important thing that we needed to take to heart and have tried to take to heart in the design of that division, is people want to work with us. They don't want to be administered, and they don't want to be worked on, right? And that is inclusive, of course, of folks with lived experience who will be a core constituency for both system performance and regional capacity. And I suspect if the way the equity-based decision-making framework shakes out the way that I think it will, and I get to say that because I'm the CEO, that they'll also be heavily involved in procurement, right? Because how contracts are structured and what they are is ultimately, right, the vehicle by which we do our work. And so we will want the LEC's engagement and the engagement of people with lived experience broadly. I just want to be clear that's not an organizational designation in the construction of our vehicles. And we've tried to lean into that already. And as Peter may have mentioned, or sorry, as Peter did mention in the AHV conversation, of working with the LEC around MOU generation and criteria generation for the emergency housing vouchers. So you can expect to see more of that as we staff to capacity. On the community, I'm going to try to get through all these four and then open for questions, because I suspect that maybe some questions may be in the descriptions of other teams. So our community impact division is our analytics and planning team. So it is made up of a director for data and research, an HMIS data manager, and 2 coordinated entry specialists. These are fewer coordinated entry staff than you are probably used to seeing. For those of you who have been close to the system for some time, that represents a splitting of function that we anticipate, where we are going to really look at coordinated entry, as I've said before, as the data spine of a by name list and of knowing where people are. And so those jobs are really going to become much more about working with communities around data standards and then architecting agreements for data sharing and then administering that kind of a system, right? The case management, the case conferencing functions, the triaging functions, the where are people stuck functions, right? That CEA currently also has, those will be with system performance. As again, that sort of collaborative problem solving work that we will need across the region. Administration, we have 3 teams there. We have IT, finance, and human resources. So we've got a system manager for IT, finance director, accounting manager, accounting clerk, and then a people operations director and a people operations assistant. Those represent, I think, obviously core administrative functions that we need to have. I think that there's, a little bit, well, I'll get to this when I talk about some of the things that we aren't able to address currently, but we are, aware of. And then, as I mentioned before, the BUDS, which is our only vacant chief role, and is currently budgeted, as I mentioned, as a chief, and is allotted to FTEs that I have not done no design work on, because I believe that those need to be designed by the ombuds as that person comes on and charts the course of their body of work in collaboration with folks experiencing homelessness. And that leaves my team, which is a sort of special projects and policy team. We have a deputy CEO, special assistant, a director of equity and justice, a director of external affairs and communications, a sub-regional planning manager, and a sub-regional planning specialist, and a senior admin. This is the change that I was discussing earlier, that is a result of conversation that we had with SCA leadership yesterday. They expressed concern that the body of work that was sub-regional planning was not going to be possible, right, without significant strain on Alexis. And I also want to be really, really clear, we don't necessarily disagree that it's a huge body of work, right? Which is why we heard that feedback and said, okay, what can we do, right? So what we've done is moved that role onto my team to make it clear that it's a cross-cutting policy function. And then additionally, taken an FTE from Peter's team and designated them as a sub-regional planning specialist to support Alexis in the execution of that body of work. And the last thing I'll say before we turn to discussion is, again, we do have concerns about some thinness in some places of this org design, right? I believe that in rank order, the first is the ombuds. That should be a much bigger team, right? And I think like we all just know that. But it is not an inherited function from either of our parents. And we don't have the dollars when we look at balancing the spin up of new function versus, again, increasingly looming administration of 200 plus contracts and $135 million that we have to do, right? And so have really tried to do the best that we can. But in candor, right, we'll continue both this budget cycle and in perpetuity to ask for money from both our public funders and our private partners to build that team. It is a vital function for our organization, and I don't think anybody feels good about where it's at. The next thing that we feel is thin is our regional capacity, right? Like in some of my initial designs, I tried to have a coordinator assigned to each region or sub-region, I should say, and we couldn't pull it off. It ate too much into the staffing of other departments. And so that is why you see what you see here. But we think that both the regional, sub-regional planning and engagement, and then also Peter's regional capacity team should both be much larger than they are in order to meet the needs that we have. And then the third place, not surprisingly, I think that sort of flows from that is like, I think that like this organization design, again, I would like to see it have more dedicated staffing where it is your primary function, right? To do equity and justice work and to, do community organizing work and to really be engaging with people both externally to the authority, but then also internally, right? To build out our capacity in that space. As a result, a lot of the functions that I've just listed are going to default to being held by my team, right? As essentially project areas until we are able to staff them in a more robust way. So I want to also be clear that the expectation here is not like, oh, well, no one will do it, right? Like the expectation is like, it's going to default to a home, the only available home that remains. But it's not ideal. And we will, I think, need to look long-term at what that looks like. And then the last two brief items before I get to questions and discussion. So the head count here is 40. This slide has a slight revision. Executive office now will be 7. Program will be 17. Community impact executive will be 8. Program will be 17. Community impact will be 5. Administration is 7. Ombuds is 3. That does still create a total of 40. And then from a budget perspective, our current admin budget is projected at 5,936,737 for FY22. And this current staffing plan at the caps for the bands that are attached to them creates a delta in the positive of $3,000. So this is a razor thin budget. I cannot stress enough that there is no more money. There is only moving stuff around, and moving stuff around it costs, right? Like you move something and you lose something somewhere else. There's no more duplicative function to be found. And so that concludes my presentation. I will stop screen sharing and would love for discussion.
Paula, did you have a question?
Yeah, but I did raise my hand earlier on accident. Um, Mark, I was just wondering. So this is a pretty bare bones budget, and I think the plan is amazing given the small budget. But I do wonder if, like, in a blue sky world, you have a different staffing plan with a budget ask.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, yes. I have so there's a staffing plan. I'll speak a little bit about it. There's a staffing plan that creates on Peter's team. So that system performance team gets broken out into teams attached to content areas. So there's a youth team, 2 single adults teams. There's oh gosh, I think there's a team for folks with disabilities. I don't have it in front of me. So, but like it creates a way, right, where like the program performance team that's supporting the community has developed very razor sharp skills on a content area, and then we're able to deploy them to providers who are working through that specific thing, right? It also created much more specialized roles, right, on those teams, so that like on the youth team, for example, there was someone whose job it was to understand behavioral health dynamics in young people, right? There was someone whose job it was to understand, like broad program dynamics. There was someone like, et cetera, right? It really got to like providing granular and specific supports and engagements so that the conversations that folks were having could go much farther with regard to amelioration of any issues. Again, it had a full set of EJI staff. It had an ombuds team, an ombuds department. I think that was 10 deep, right? Oh yeah, like if budget became available, we would build a very different organization. We had community organizers on the community impact team. Like we took all the things that we're trying to get to and like had fully staffed them. And so what you see in front of you is looking at the budget that we have and trying to lay the track towards that, but really aware that like, we can't hit it yet. So trying to be walking in the right direction. I don't know who raised their hand first, so I don't feel. I think maybe Seema and then Harold.
Yeah, actually, I think you answered a good chunk of it with Paula's question. I was curious what that sort of pie in the sky budget looks like. How big is that? How like much of a gap is there between ideal and where we're at right now? And do you expect to get there over the next couple of years, I guess?
I think we have to. I think we really have to. We like it has to be a win and not an if. I think it is roughly double to really get into the things that I think we would say build out all those functions at a level that we are like, okay, we're really doing this, right? As opposed to what will be for at least year one, which is like scrappy. And again, I cannot stress enough, like we've put this together as a team to say like, we're gonna get it done, right? But the robustness of it and the sleeplessness that some of us, including the people on this call, will experience, right, is gonna be high for some time. That's startup life, signed up for it. I see Harold and then John.
Who's after me? Did you say?
John.
John, I'll go after John because he hasn't spoken. I have, so I'll go after him if we have time.
Sure.
Sure, no problem. Well, first of all, Mark, I would say the first thing is congratulations. I think you have put together a staffing plan that in general does what we need to do and what we have been wanting to do with this agency from the very beginning, which is stand it up and get it going. I appreciate blue sky talk. We don't get a lot of blue sky out here in the Pacific Northwest, but you will. You will when you succeed. And I think this is a plan that does put us on a path to success. And, I'm very happy to support it. I think it is, as I say, a really good plan. A little bit low on the administration, as you say. I could probably go in and say, well, this should be included in that. But you know what? You kept the administration cost low, and I think that's important. So again, I'm just going to say congratulations, and I'll be happy to support this. Interested to hear if anybody has any changes to it. But again, congratulations, and I think this gets us ready to go.
Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Harold, you had something, and then I had a quick question for Mark.
So Mark, I'm going to go back to the what Sarah Rankin had mentioned, and just let's call it a core competency. I don't know. I can understand what you're saying. At each level or each group would have their person, but what would it look like in the job description if we made sure that the person coming in had that in their description, not their color or their look or their sex or whatever, but that they had at least a year or two in some type of equity work? Would that raise the budget price, or would it just maybe raise the skill level? Because I do agree with you, throughout the agents, throughout King County, and maybe throughout the world, there should be a core competency of where providers are having people come in. Because just my experience and knowledge from King County, only people at the top would get the good training, and we relied on them to filter it down. And I'd much rather if we're going up from the bottom and getting those people good training and then the right to demand those that money that they need to be able to feed themselves and house themselves in King County. You know, and especially that region, that city that's called Seattle. You know, so and I do want to also say, you know, for me, lived experience as a coalition, I have to go through the coalition, and we didn't have a lot of time, and I hate that time thing because it pushes us into a corner, and I don't like being in that corner, you know, scratch, crawl, and fight my way out of it. But just for myself, I would have to go back to lived experience for their leadership and their board to know where we're going. That's
Yeah, I think so. Two things. One, on the time thing, I will say, and this, I'm not pushing back on you, Harold. I'm just like offering transparency. We were scheduled to meet with the Lived Experience Coalition yesterday, and that meeting was canceled. I think because the entire leadership team was not meeting, and so they weren't able to meet with us, right? So it was our intention. We had a very tight timeline between when we were cleared and had presented this to the all the staff working groups and had gotten feedback there, and then to get to here. I again, in transparency, was talking via text message with Lamont and saying, you know, we are like, once the staffing plan is approved, if the Lived Experience Coalition has feedback that we can accommodate within what we got, we'll always take it. So I want to be really clear that like there's my hope, right, is that with an approved staffing plan, what we then do after that is like, if there are tweaks that we need to make, I mean, that's running an organization, right? And to board member Chalmanek's point, right, like this will get us started. And I don't think anyone is like, and it is going to be perfect. To your first point, though, which is really interesting, and I think is absolutely something we can do. So we can include in JDs a sort of baseline equity requirement. I would be interested to work with folks on the development of that requirement, and and sort of trying to strike the right, like having it be a competency that someone can. Thank you, Sarah. JD is job descriptions in this context. That is a competency that people can hit, but we'll have to balance that again with like staff level, right? So that like when people are coming in at entry level, the expectation is not that you be a master at anything, right? Like your whole job is to be like, I can do stuff and I'm here to learn, right? Like, and so we want to make sure that it's leveled right along the bands. And then, but I will say that for me, because I've been the equity person at like multiple organizations, right? And I've always been the only one. And so stuff doesn't happen, right? And so it was so critical for me that there be other people throughout the agency who had some responsibility for ensuring that we are living into our values. Because otherwise, it's like a couple people up top trying to, like sift through everything every day. And it's an impossible task, right? And so that's why those designations are so critical for me. So I'm agreeing and absolutely committing to working with you and anyone else interested to develop an equity competency to insert into the JDs for approved jobs, and saying that, if this is approved, and I hope that it is shortly, right, that it still is important for us to have people who are going to drive those buckets of work. And I see Sarah.
Thank you, Mark. I just wanted to support and reinforce what you guys are just discussing now. I think Harold's proposal is a really, really good one, because as you were giving your presentation on this staffing plan, I kept hearing sort of a pain in your voice that the equity piece isn't something that the current budget can support, right, in terms of your vision for how it should work. And you're absolutely right. If there's too few people who are working on equity issues, there's going to be no way to make sure that it's pervasive and not just surface, right? We don't want it to be performative. We want it to be part of the DNA of this whole thing. So I'm just sort of adding on to say that I support Harold's suggestion that become part of the hiring model, or part of what you're looking for in the staff that you bring on, so that we stand the best chance of sort of weathering those issues that you're already sensing, right? And that I kept hearing you sort of agonize about as you're going over the staffing model. So thanks to Harold for coming up with that suggestion, and thanks to you for committing to incorporating that into the process.
Thank you.
Mark, real quick from me in terms of a quick question too, before we want to try and do time considerations for ourselves, as well as we still retain quorum here to consider a vote on your plan that you presented to us. Before I get into my quick question in terms of the logistical next steps, I do appreciate Sound Cities Association's leadership's considerations shared yesterday, and the way that you and your team have been able to reconfigure it in the manner it is, both in terms of having Alexis as a part of directly your team and having a direct person as a specialist under her and support that large body of work. And so I'm curious, as we are still getting towards the latter portion of this now, and even past increased time, hoping that we can still hear from her directly too about and her presentation that she'll give to us today, as well as she'll give to the governing committee tomorrow, on what that looks like, what that work has been so far, and what that looks like in the future. I guess a quick logistical question for you, for transparency's sake too. We have the staffing plan teed up for the governing committee to consider tomorrow. Should this implementation board approve it today, give us a timeline in terms of what your outlook is and next steps. Should both the implementation board and governing committee approve this today and tomorrow? You have mentioned some key priorities of 3 or 4 top that you'd like to hire sooner than later. Are you going to put these all out there? Are you going to do a succession? And in terms of a specific order, what does that look like for you and your team beyond tomorrow, should things go smoothly in that regard?
Thank you. That's a really good question. So what I can, unfortunately, it's a little bit of a 2-part answer. The first part is that we are in conversation right now with the city of Seattle to identify some additional funding that can support the immediate hiring of 7 positions. We have worked with, or I should say, I have worked with Peter to identify what those 7 positions are. They are currently all within his team because we have a significant, and I'm just going to be brutally honest here, we're very concerned about the capacity necessary to stand up the administration required to take on, again, those 200 plus contracts and $135 million in disbursement, right? And if that isn't there by really December 1, right, then like the idea that we will start cutting checks in January, it's not realistic. And so that is our first place of like, we have to make sure that there is capacity there. I've also recently, in sort of hopes that today and tomorrow would go smoothly, I've also reached out to the county to begin a conversation about what ramp up capacity they are anticipating being able to provide. And the core question here, just so that you're all clear, is not really about access to any new FY21 dollars. It's really questions about when FY22 dollars become available to spend out of. And then also looking at some of our federal contracts, which have, if any of you have worked on federal grant timelines, they have real wonky cycles, right? Where it's like the federal timeline on a year will start in September, right? And so some of those things are going to happen. And then there are some unexpended dollars that are, sort of in the COC space. And so looking to braid all that together, I think that we will have it's likely, one other thing. We also identified today about $350,000 in underspend of the budgeted positions for this year. And so we can use that underspend also to create a couple positions that will allow us to, drive. I think that the places where we will execute hires are Peter's team, and we'll look to add capacity around the sub-regional work, and then the community impact team, I think are priorities for us. I think right now, and again, just so that we're all thinking about the same stuff, right? Our finance operations and our IT operations are contracted out through the end of the year. And so we don't anticipate needing to begin immediately ramping up in that space until, it's not far away, but it's about 3 months away, right? So that like, we'd be looking to really ensure that there were staff in place October, November, so that they can do the knowledge transfer with the teams that are currently shepherding that work and then pick it up starting January 1.
Thank you, Mark, for all of that. Any real quick questions? Just want to make sure for time consideration's sake that we do have 2 potential votes for us. One is obviously the staffing plan that we've been talking about for a while right now. The other is recognizing a reminder for the board, consideration of policy and bylaws as well, including the consideration of the revised communications policy that we discussed at last month's meeting. Simha, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, just briefly, if this staffing plan is approved, and hopefully, I hope it is, will you have the flexibility to shift it a little bit if you need to in the coming months? Like,
my understanding, based on my interpretation of the ILA, is yes. That I am empowered to have operational authority over the agency, but that the ILA specifically requires that the inaugural staffing plan be approved by the board and the governing committee, right? And I think there was concern, right, that like someone would come in and like build up something that made no sense. But I do not see, in my interpretation and based on what I've discussed with others, anything that indicates that any operational change post, right, would require board or governing committee approval. That said, right, like I do err on the side of like, let's talk about it, right? So like, if we were going to make a major change, we would come talk about it, right? Like if we're going to make a brand new department or spin a department down and do something else instead, right? Like that's the kind of change that I would want to have conversation about. Even if it didn't technically need to be approved, like I don't want anyone to be like, what happened to the community impact division? Like that, why is that gone, right? That's just not a good way to build and work in coalition.
Camino, can I put a motion on the floor?
Yes, please go ahead, Damien.
I move approval of the King County Regional Homelessness Authority fiscal year 22 staffing plan.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor and we have a second from Paula. Any further discussion?
I just want to thank Mark and his team for their hard work in putting this together and just getting prepared for this launch and moving forward. I trust in your leadership on the day-to-day operations side that you'll make the decisions needed to continue to move this authority forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. Thank you, Sima, for raising that question and Mark for answering insight in terms of what's next as well. All right, we have the motion on the floor. I'm just gonna, I think we need to do roll call on this one. So actually, I will just go ahead and do this. We will, let's do roll call. Maria, can you walk us through real quick, starting with Pastor Anderson?
You bet. Carrie Anderson, yay or nay?
Okay.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Aye.
Thank you. Nate Caminos?
Aye.
Paula Carvalho?
Yes.
John Chelmaniak?
Aye.
Gordon McHenry Jr.? Harold Odom?
Aye.
Damien Patnod?
Aye.
Adrian Quinn?
Yes.
Michael Ramos?
Aye.
Sarah Rankin?
Yes.
Simha Reddy?
Aye.
Juanita Spotted Elk or Lamont Green?
All right, the motion passes. Congratulations. Thank you, Mark, and everyone on the staff team. Look forward to working with you and the governing committee on the staffing plan and on needs moving forward. For the remaining time that we have here, about 18 minutes or so, I'm actually going to look to you, Mark, Peter, and Alexis. What do you need here? Or what's the best course of action? I certainly do not want to undercut or leave the sub-regional planning update and presentation short with the time that we have remaining. I also recognize that there's a slew of policies that are before us for consideration as well, particularly one in particular, a few in particular. I want to make sure that you're able to operationally stay in business here with what you want to do and not wait a month for us to have to give you the approval to do so. So Mark and staff, look to you on what do you think would be the best order. And Alexis, and I think if implementation boards can look to your presentation tomorrow during the governing committee, but also have you come back in a more dedicated fashion. Maybe that be a August or September update for us to go even deeper with some of the things that we could have better even understand, so that you don't have to give the exact same presentation today that you're going tomorrow. At least have a little bit of a succession plan there too. So again, looking to staff for guidance on what the best use of time here that is for the time remaining that we have this afternoon.
My impulse would be, and it, you know, I'll put it back to you in the sense, or you all, I should say, in the sense that like, if folks want to have a special session that is dedicated to sub-regional work, I actually think that's a great idea because it's a lot of work and it's really important. And it is it truly, right? I've said this repeatedly. That's the thing that we're here to do is regionalize, right? So I would, if you all are willing to calendar that, then truly we could come back next week after even, and spend a whole session on the regionality components, right? And what we've been doing to connect with people, what our plans are, which goes well beyond Alexis. You know, Peter, Ann, and I also play a lot of roles in that we'd love to talk with you all about. But I will say I do need those operational policies. So it's also like, if you feel like you can pass them in like a quick review, and then we can give, still 10-ish minutes to Alexis, then I think that she could still accomplish her presentation. But I really would encourage us to have a long conversation about the regionality stuff.
Lovely idea, Mark. Let's go ahead and focus on the operational ones on a special session too, whether it's a week 2, we can figure out with the sub-regional planning committee, or even just Harold and I as co-chairs in the next co-chairs meeting, what that could look like, and whether, Alexis, you want to even potentially invite other external partners to be a part of that study session to talk about it from that perspective as well, beyond just staff and board members. So thumbs up and head nods from across the Zoom meeting here. All good with that approach? All right, let's go ahead and do so then. We'll do that. We'll go with that plan. Thanks, Mark and Alexis, for getting us there in that regard. So let's go on to consideration of policy and bylaws and a potential vote on it all. Mark, Peter, Ann.
So what you received in your packets was, and I will provide a brief voice overview of them, and then turn to Peter and Ann on some of them. So there was a revised communications policy. That policy should now reflect the feedback that you received. Ann, do you want to speak to the shifts that happened there?
If I could figure out which tab had the policy actually open on it. I wanted to make it more clear what the role of the committee was, and that in their advocacy, it was in their personal and professional capacity, and that we would be referring any questions about the authority's official positions to the appropriate staff. So I think we just made it more clear based on your feedback, and hopefully that is captured here.
Thanks, Ann. There's an amended procurement policy. And again, so we discussed that, had a really good conversation, talked about making sure procurement was subordinated to the equity-based decision-making framework, and then it didn't make it into the final voice amendment, and so technically is not bound yet, right? So what we've done is gone in and made that change, which I believe is highlighted for you on the bottom of page 2 as a sentence. And then we have a bundle of 8 new policies: governance, internal controls, accounting, financial reporting, treasury and investments, revenue and receivables, contract holders, capital assets, and payroll. I will say that the majority of these, accounting, financial reporting, revenue, receivables, contract holders, capital assets, payroll, those in particular are very straightforward. They are about compliance. Like, we have to have these so that we pay our stuff. We say we're going to pay our stuff on time, right? Like that they're not complicated. They're all, I believe, a page-ish, and they're very designed to be high level, so that it binds us to a framework, and then we can build out the operations and business procedure right beneath it. The 2 policies that are more substantive are governance and internal controls, and treasury and investment. Governance and internal control is largely oriented to delegate the appropriate staff at the agency to shepherd its finances, right? So that is myself, Meg, Peter, and outlines, right, how we are again going to be held accountable. Peter, is there anything you would add on that one?
That covers it. These are the core backbone of policy. There's an effort to not mix procedures and policies together. We did that intentionally to keep the policies at a very high level framework. That way, as the agency is evolving and the procedures need to be continuously updated, we're not continuously going back to the policy. So that was an intention. And I think these are, this frames out the fundamental basic set to get us moving. Also, just wanted to make sure that you understood that this was a framework that we were continuously working on.
And Treasury and Investments really just outlines, again, there's signatory authority in there, clarity around designation, and then it also allows us to open a petty cash account. We currently operate all of our banking through King County Treasury, but petty cash would actually need to be held through like a more traditional banking mechanism. And we need to make sure that we have the appropriate authority to open accounts. So that is the purpose of that. Taken en masse, as Peter said, these are just core operating fiscal policies. There is nothing in them other than like, we need these to do business. So hopefully there are no concerns.
Mark and Peter, this is Adrian and I have a couple of comments when it's the appropriate time. I'm sorry, I can't raise my hand since I'm on the phone.
I think now would be that time, if I'm looking at Nate.
Thanks, Mark. With regard to the governance and internal controls, I think that it would be great in the whistleblower section if it were not in the passive voice. It says any whistleblower complaints will be investigated. I think it would be great if we're very specific by whom will do the investigation. And then just as a quick matter, one, it delineates the ways that one may let the implementation board know if there's a concern. I would also include text message as well. And perhaps that's something that could be amended in the future. I don't know if there's a specific legal reason why that was not included.
Not to my knowledge. I'm comfortable with that. I think that like you all would, and so I would suggest that I'm happy to make those amendments. I would want to have a nuanced conversation about who does the investigation. I don't know that I want to voice them in that. And text message for me is fine. I will say to you all, that means that your texts become part of a thing, like of an investigation. So like, just like right. We can voice them in that, but I want everybody to know that is true.
And the same would hold true for email too, which is already included.
Right.
And so for the other, I also was a little bit concerned about the number of people who have signing authority for Treasury and Investment. I mean, for 5 people within a 40-person organization to have signing authority seems like a lot to me. I know that not that many people, when I was at the county, had signing authority, and we had 500 staff and a $1.5 billion budget. And so I'm certainly very comfortable with the top 3, but it seems like it would be a very unusual circumstance for the top 3 leaders of the organization to be absent, and then for signing authority to be given to communication staff and others, even though 2 people were, 2 signatures are required.
I think, yeah, I mean, for us, I think that's reflective of a desire to always be fast and also to be a little flat, to be honest, right? That like, we like as a core team of sort of chiefs and senior leaders, I think that like the idea there is that like we're a team and should be a little interoperable when it comes to making sure that stuff gets done on behalf of the folks that are trying to get a thing. I'm open to feedback on that from the board, and if folks would like us to again voice them in that down, I think we're open to that. I think it just reflects the position that we were trying to take with regard to flatness of structure, and again noting, right, that like if there's that many vacancies, right, that we do need 2 signatures in order to move something forward. But again, it's not like I don't have like a hard line there, so I just want to be super clear. I'm not like up on a hill trying to die. I'm just explaining what our thinking was.
I think that makes sense. I mean, potentially part of the requirement could then be that if the top 3 are unavailable, that it needs to be in writing a delegation of authority, maybe another way of doing a financial control. I think you're right about flattening out the organization, although when we try to think about public money and financial controls, just having 5 people with signing authority is a lot.
Understood. We can, I'm comfortable with a voice amend on that down to the 3 with written designation for, specific instances. Is that what you're saying, Adrian? Just so I'm clear.
Yes, and I'm just one person on the board here. If others feel that it's more important, that we demonstrate that it's a flat organization, I'm comfortable with that too. I just wanted to raise a concern, but again, I'm just one implementation board member.
Understood. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Adrian. We have Michael with his hand up and then Pastor Anderson next.
So I appreciate the changes in the communication plan. I think it's clearer. I think it also, I am most comfortable if it assumes an active voice on behalf of the CEO and the staff related to public affairs, public comment. So for example, the quote unquote Compassion Seattle initiative, I would assume that the regional authority would take a stand on that if it could do damage to the authority should it be passed in the city of Seattle. And so, defer, I expect that the staff would lead and we would follow in terms of the board. The other side of that is that I would like to know the mechanism by which we as implementation board members with some background in the area communicate with you around public matters for which your voice might be needed. And whether we do that in the public forum of this meeting, do we send you an email? Do we write a public letter? What way, and I'm saying it officially because many of us are engaged in the public debate. And so want to respect your authority. And what is the proper mechanism for that? So that being said, I'm fine with the communications plan, but the underlying issues are there because things are at play right now that could impact funding for the authority going down the road.
I appreciate that. So the authority, I will be clear, the authority has a policy that's in place that we believe is appropriate for us, that we do not comment on anything on a ballot, including people and initiatives, right? We will comment on legislation, we will work with legislators, we will work with implementers, but anything on a ballot is off limits for us. That I will be clear continues a sort of policy trend, right? That the city, the county, like that's just typically what government agencies do, other than elected officials, right? Who talk about whatever they want. Again, in your private capacities as people, please talk about whatever you want, please, please, feel free. The other thing in terms of flagging something for us, email Ann and I. I'm like, hey, maybe you should talk about this.
Any of your regular forms of communication, call, email, any of that's great.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so my question kind of goes back to Adrian's comment about the 5 people with check signing authority. And I was just thinking, it seems to me odd that you would need 5. So I think you've already revisited it. So I think 3 people are sufficient with a group this size.
I'm totally fine with that. We can voice amend that policy to be 3.
Thank you, Pastor Anderson. And somehow had a question in the chat too. Somehow, did you want to speak to that real quick? So Mark's looking at it and team.
Yeah, sure. Just to follow up to Adrian's question, making it more active around the issue of who actually investigates whistleblower issues. Is that something that needs to be specified within this policy, or is this one of those instances of just saying, hey, here's our policy and we'll create a procedure for the investigation of issues?
I will say I would be comfortable with it, and I would be more comfortable with it being in policy.
Okay.
I would like to pass this policy and then come back with an amendment. But in spaces like these, my operating principle is the person who comes after me may suck, right? And you don't want them to have operational authority over how a thing gets investigated. You want that to be laid out and a thing that is just gonna happen, right? Particularly because like if it's a procedural thing, but like, you know, say I'm involved, right? Like whose discretion does that become? I think if it's not like very clearly laid out, like in this instance, it becomes the deputy CEO. In this instance, it's outside counsel. Like these are things that I just want to be thoughtful about and then bring back to you all as an amendment.
Okay, thanks.
Do we still have quorum? Can we do this?
We have quorum, so yes, I was about to thank you. Yeah, we're still together here, going strong this afternoon. Appreciate everyone staying later. So any other questions? If not, I will entertain a motion here, particularly as folks have a hard stop in less than 60 seconds.
I move that we adopt these policies with the voice amendment or with the amendment of reducing the number of people with signing authority from 5 to 3.
So thank you, Simha, for that motion. Knowing that also just for general discussion, okay, I'll call for a second, then I'll say something.
John Shulman.
Thank you, John, for the second. Any discussion? I just wanted to make a logistical point as the point we were just discussing on whistleblower earlier, noting that for the future, we have staff recommendation on an amended policy to that amendment to that policy for future board consideration. All right, let's go through a roll call on this one too. Maria, can you walk us through real quick, starting with Pastor Anderson?
You bet. Carrie Anderson,
Yes.
Nate Caminos,
Yes.
Paula Carvalho,
Yes.
John Chelmaniak,
Aye.
Gordon McHenry, Harold Odom,
Yes.
Damian Patnod,
Aye.
Adrian Quinn,
Yes.
Michael Ramos,
Yes.
Sarah Rankin, Simha Reddy,
Aye.
Lamont Green for Juanita Spotted Elk.
All right, the motion passes 2 for 2 so far, Mark and company. Thanks for all the hard work on that. Harold, leave it to you. Any other business that you had for the group or any other board members had for the rest of the board before we close today's meeting?
So Adrian Quinn has been going to do September's land acknowledgement. I need someone to do September or August. You don't have to do it now, say it now, but that call will be going out. And anything that you want to bring to the board, culturalize, how we can make the board better. This has been a very engaging and everyone's been tremendously helpful in this board meeting. And that's what I hope it should be at everyone. So I just want to say thank you to the members. I feel very gratified and I've learned a lot today. So just thank you.
Thank you all. I appreciate it. See you soon.
All right, with that,
Thanks,
meeting's adjourned.
thanks,
Take
Mark
care,
and
y'all.
team. Good work.
Bye-bye.